So let's get into talking about our lesson. We've been talking about faith a lot over the last few months, and we're in Joshua chapter 3. We're back there in the Old Testament, and we've been discussing the children of Israel and their faith journey into learning to trust the Lord. And we're going to continue that this morning, maybe even next week, I believe, based on the notes that I've got. I expect we'll talk about it some more next week. Let's just read the first 5 verses just to come back into this. It says in Joshua 3, verse 1, "And Joshua rose early in the morning, and they removed from Shittim, and they came to Jordan, he and all the children of Israel, and lodged there before they passed over. And it came to pass after 3 days that the officers went through the hosts, and they commanded the people, saying, When ye see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God, and the priests and the Levites bearing it, then ye shall remove from your place and go after it. Yet there shall be a space between you and it, about 2,000 cubits by measure. Come not near unto it, that ye may know the way by which you must go, for ye have not passed this way heretofore. And Joshua said unto the people, Sanctify yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you." And so we've been talking about this for a couple weeks. Let's pray, and then we'll continue that conversation. Father, thank you for the day, for your love and your mercy and your grace, and how you've laid out our path, and you know the direction we need to take and we should take, so that we can grow and become the people that you would like us to be. And we ask for your blessing on our time together this morning. I pray that you would bless the Nichols as they're traveling this morning. Pray that they've made it to Memphis already. You'd keep your hand upon them and bless them in their last day here in the States with their kids. And we pray for your blessing on our time here, that you'd use this to encourage and strengthen each one of us in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. We talked about sanctifying yourself. That's how we started this. And that means to cleanse yourself. Prepare yourself for this journey of growth and this journey of faith. And so to cleanse, to set apart, that's what that means. And so then we talked about last Sunday, we talked about stepping out in faith, and how from here, after they sanctified themselves, the next thing was, hey, the Lord's going to show up after you're sanctified, and the next thing he wants you to do is the priests carrying the ark are going to have to put their feet into the water of Jordan before it parts left and right, and you get to cross on dry ground. That's actually the intermediate or the middle step. I'll call it the second step of our faith journey. And I want to kind of back up and broaden out and look back at their journey from the beginning and look at that, and then we'll spend a little bit of time looking at this step that we talked about last week of their crossing of Jordan. But that required obedience. I mean, it requires faith, but at that point, faith in something that couldn't be seen. God says, get your feet wet, and then I'll do what you hope and you need for me to do, which is open the river up so you can cross on dry ground. And so last week we talked about steps of our faith that require obedience and how we're going to grow in that way. So this morning I want to, again, back up. I want to talk about this bigger picture a little bit. One truth we must always, by faith of course, keep in mind is that God is involved in our lives, whether we can see it or not. We certainly can't hear his audible voice. We can't see his presence. We can't see his hand. But we know that he's involved by faith. And knowing that, he desires us to grow, and to help us grow, we need to take steps of faith along the path that are going to help us to grow, and know that he is guiding our steps. So we're going to have to pay attention to, again, his word, his primary way of counseling us and directing us, and people around us that are going to give us counsel, like Joshua led the people of Israel. He has people in our lives, parents, pastor, teachers, fellow believers that are going to guide and direct us on this trip and on this journey, and trust that God's not there trying to cause us to fall, but to cause us to grow. Somebody said to me this morning after they walked in, "Well, I need to exercise." You know, you can really tell the difference. For several months there, I was going to cardiac rehab and working out on all their equipment for an hour, hour and a half every day. And then when that ended and they said, "All right, now you got to pay for it yourself. You're going to be back tomorrow." I said, "No, I've got equipment at my house." Right? You got to have something to hang your clothes on. They said, "You going to use it?" I said, "Maybe." After I take all the clothes off of it, get it out and dust it off. They said, "Well, if you change your mind, you know where we're at." I said, "Well, okay." So anyway, yes, I have used it. I did get it uncovered, and I have been using it. Not anywhere near an hour and a half a day, though, or every other day. But I get on it, and I'll ride 20 minutes or so, 25 minutes, and do my thing. But boy, I can sure tell the difference. When I was going into their place to exercise, and I left there, boy, I felt good. But now when I ride on my little device for 20 minutes and I've lost my breath and I get off and I can't walk straight, right? It makes a difference, does it not? God's trying to get us to grow our faith. Do you realize if you don't exercise your faith, not only is it not growing, but it's shrinking? But we have to trust him. He is putting steps in front of us, these trials, these tests, these troubles, we often call them, that are in our path are not there to hurt us, but to increase our faith in him. 1 Corinthians 10, verse 13, you might remember this verse, "There hath no temptation taken you, but such as is common to man. But God is faithful, who will not suffer you to be tempted above that you're able, but will with the temptation also make a way to escape, that you may be able to bear it." God is not trying to hurt us. He's trying to help us. These are exercises for our faith to grow in. And so that's what God's doing, and that's what's happening there. So let's talk about Israel and see how it applies to our lives. I want to take you back to the beginning of this journey, Exodus. In Exodus. Now, there's a long way from Exodus to Joshua. And a lot of things have happened in the children of Israel's lives in between these two passages. But this is the beginning of their journey. Remember, of course, Joseph, sold by his brothers into slavery. Down into Egypt he went in bondage under Potiphar in prison. Then second in command of all of Egypt. His family comes down. He provides food for them. They move into the land of Goshen. And Pharaoh's going to take care of everybody, and that's super nice until Joseph dies and the Pharaoh dies, and now somebody else is in charge, and the children of Israel end up in slavery, with taskmasters beating them to make bricks so that Pharaoh could build his monuments and all of that. So God talks to Moses. He's run away. He's in the wilderness. He's with a shepherd and married his daughter, and God speaks to him on the backside of the mountain and says, Go down and get the children of Israel. It's time for them to come up out of here. Now, that's basically the overview of what's happened up to this point. In chapter 4 of Exodus, I want to call your attention to the first 4 verses. It says, and Moses answered and said, and this is Moses talking to God on the backside of the desert. Moses answered and said, but behold, they will not believe me, nor hearken unto my voice. For they will say, the Lord hath not appeared unto thee. And the Lord said unto him, what is that in thine hand? And he said, a rod. And he said, cast it on the ground. And he cast it on the ground, and it became a serpent. And Moses fled before it. And the Lord said unto Moses, put forth thine hand, and take it by the tail. And he put forth his hand, and caught it, and it became a rod in his hand. And that they may believe, it says that they may believe that the Lord God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, hath appeared unto me. I want you to notice that Moses and God are talking, and they refer from verse 1 all the way down to verse 5, and even beyond that, they refer to this they. That they may believe. Well, they're not going to believe, and God says, well, let's do this, and so that they will believe, right? The they that they were discussing, God and Moses were discussing, was the children of Israel. His brothers and sisters, his cousins, his aunts, his uncles, his ancestors, his children, his family's children. The whole nation and tribe of Israel. He said, they're not going to believe me. So God gave them the sign so that they would believe. Of course, he gave him the sign for Pharaoh as well and told him, go ahead and do it in front of Pharaoh, but he's not going to believe you. Right? And so when Moses and Aaron, because Aaron meets him in the desert, Moses and Aaron head back down into Egypt, and showed the signs unto the children of Israel, and tell them, well, God told me this, and here's the sign that you should believe me. They were thrilled. They were just beside themselves. We get to get out of slavery. We get to move on to this promised land that we've always heard about. They were excited. But go down to verse 31 in Exodus 4. In verse 31, the end of the chapter, and the people believed. And when they heard that the Lord had visited the children of Israel, that they looked upon their affliction, when they bowed their heads and worshiped. Then they bowed their heads and worshiped. So they're excited, right? They're thrilled. So then the next step is Moses goes to Pharaoh and says, hey, Pharaoh, God says, let my people go. And he puts the rod down and becomes a snake. And his magicians put their rods down. They become snake. Of course, Moses' rod eats all their snake. His snake eats their snake. But Pharaoh's heart's hard, and he doesn't believe. And I'm not going to let him go. And, of course, you know the story, how that went, right? But as Pharaoh told his taskmasters, you stop giving these people straw. They obviously got too much to do, and they're not working hard, so don't give them the straw. They got to go find it themselves and still make the same amount of bricks. Well, Moses came back after talking to Pharaoh and having all that happen, passes by these leaders of Israel, and they're not happy with him anymore. They've lost their worshiping spirit. They've set aside their excitement for a while. And Exodus chapter 5, verses 20 and 21, and they met Moses and Aaron, who stood in the way as they came forth unto Pharaoh, or from Pharaoh rather. Verse 21 says, and they said unto them, the Lord look upon you, and judge, because ye have made our savor to be abhorred in the eyes of Pharaoh, and in the eyes of his servants, to put a sword in their hand to slay us. Well, now they're not very happy with Moses, regardless of who they think told him to come. Okay? And then from there, of course, all the plagues happen, right? And I'm just kind of doing a brief overview to again, start our journey of faith, there's trouble that begins. Our journey of faith always has some trouble involved, right? We know Pharaoh's not going to let him go, says he's not going to let him go, so the plagues come, the 10 plagues. The first one's the water gets changed into blood. So he goes and touches his rod in the Nile River, it turns to blood. They're digging around in the land trying to find clean water. They can't find, every water everywhere is blood. But Pharaoh's magicians copy it. I don't know where they found water to turn into blood or why they would do it if they did find it. But that's what the Bible says happened, and that's what those foolish people did. And number two, since he didn't let him go, Moses waved his staff, and the next thing you know, frogs are climbing up out of everywhere. Took over the whole land, and frogs were one of the things the Egyptians could not stand. They were made their skin crawl. They were more scared of frogs than my daughter Kayla is. And so anyway, from Exodus 8, chapter 8 and verses 1 through 15, we got the frogs. But hey, somehow and for some reason, Pharaoh's magicians brought up more frogs. Now again, I don't know why they would do such a thing. I'd have made the frogs disappear if I had the opportunity to do that, but that's not what they did. And so they made more frogs come. They said, well, see, we can copy that trick. That's no big deal. And Pharaoh said, no, I'm not going to let them go. The next thing they did, that Moses did, he waved the staff again and said, you don't want to believe me and you don't want to obey God? Okay, fine. And so lice comes up. And it's covering the people and the animals, and boy, they didn't like that very much. And Pharaoh said, all right, magicians, you show him that's nothing, but they couldn't do that. Boy, I'm sure glad, for everybody's sake, that they didn't make any more lice come. But they couldn't make them disappear either, and finally Pharaoh says, all right, fine. But he hardened his heart even after the lice was gone, and he wouldn't let them go. The next thing that happened is Moses tapped his rod again, and flies came up, covered everything. God in everything was in their food, and that's one thing I just don't even like, even at a picnic, flies in my food. Drives me crazy. Pharaoh still wouldn't let them go, so plague number 5 comes. What is that? That's the death of their cattle. Let's hit them in the pocketbook. Let's take away their food. And so their cattle begin dying, and that still didn't convince him. So then, well, let's try something a little more serious. And so the next plague that came, Exodus chapter 9, verses 8 to 12, boils showed up on all their flesh. Let's make them really uncomfortable. Let's not just be inconvenient. Man, they've got boils all over themselves. Pharaoh's still not convinced, so plague number 7 comes, Exodus 9, verses 13 to 35, and hail comes down and destroys all the crops that are growing at that time. The flax and all that stuff, it's beaten to the ground. Now they've got no food. They're almost in as bad a shape as they were when Joseph got there or was about to get to because of the famine that was coming. They still didn't yield to that, and so the next plague is, God says, all right, there's the next crop is growing. I'm going to send locusts down there. Exodus chapter 10, verses 1 through 7, and locusts ate everything that was left that the hail didn't kill. Now they're really in bad shape, but they still won't let Israel go. So plague number 9 in Exodus chapter 10, verses 21 to 24, God made a darkness come over the land of Egypt. And it says it was a darkness that could be felt. And it lasted for 3 days. And there wasn't a light anywhere that would brighten the sky, that would do anything for them. It was a darkness that could be felt. Well, it almost convinced him, but as soon as the lights came back on, Pharaoh hardened his heart again. It took 10 plagues to finally convince Pharaoh to let the children of Israel go. The 10th plague came in Exodus chapter 12, verses 29 to 32, and that was the death of every firstborn. The firstborn in the castle, the firstborn out in the courtyard, the firstborn of the cows, the firstborn of the sheep, the firstborn of the puppy dogs, the firstborn, every firstborn died in the whole land. And they woke up at midnight realizing what had happened. And they wept sore. And Pharaoh called for Aaron and Moses in the middle of the night and said, "Get out of here." Of course, when the sun rose the next day, they regretted that decision. Right? God demonstrated to Pharaoh and the people of Egypt and the children of Israel that he in fact was God and had power, and it was his will to let the children of Israel go out of bondage and to take them back to a promised land. That's what God did with the plagues. And the people of Israel saw all this, wondered at all this, were amazed by all this, were thankful for all of this. And so after seeing all of those miracles, everyone, Israel, Egypt, Pharaoh, they still had some doubts. But then God showed up in a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. Now you can't deny that. It's right there in front of you. And the children of Israel followed that pillar out of the region, and they're following it across the land, and God, through this pillar, led them step by step, footprint by footprint, and took them right to the edge of the Red Sea. We talked about this for a couple months. They were stuck between two mountain peaks there on the right next to the Red Sea, but God led them right to that very point. They couldn't deny it. They saw it with their own eyes. But then Pharaoh changed his mind, said, "I'm going to go get my slaves back." There could be no doubt how they arrived there. There could be no doubt about who led them there. But the next thing, we studied it for a couple of months, Exodus chapter 14. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time there. We spent a lot of time there. But here's what I want to point out to you. Those children of Israel crossed the Red Sea on dry ground. God, they didn't have to get their feet wet. All they had to do was watch. They watched as God destroyed the country of Egypt. They watched as God plagued them and beat them down until they finally said, "Uncle, I'll let them go." And then he led them visibly right to that spot. And when they said, "Well, now what?" And here comes Pharaoh beside, God opened up the water and let them cross and destroyed their enemies in a moment. That was a step of faith for them. They doubted it when Moses said, "Hey, God, I'm going to go down there and say, let's get out of here." And they're going to say, "Why should we follow you?" Valid point. He said, "Well, here's a sign." And he showed them, and they believed it. But then they doubted. And then they believed, and then they doubted, and then they believed. And even when they got by the Red Sea, "Are you sure, Moses? I think we should have just stayed, because this doesn't look good." And God opened the sea. What was he doing? He was building their faith in baby steps. Yes, it was difficult. Yes, it took faith. Yes, they were challenged. But God showed them every step of the way. He let them see the difficulty, and then he let them see his answer to the difficulty. Baby steps. God will lead you in some baby steps, but somewhere along the way, he's going to ask you to take bigger steps. We're going to have to go to some toddler steps. And that's where we were at in Joshua chapter number 3, toddler steps. God had shown them. They said, "We're hungry." He had manna fall out of the sky and fed them every single day. "But we want meat." Quail fell out of the sky 3 feet deep and said, "There you go, eat it until you throw up." And they did. "We need water." Moses smack a rock and water would come out flowing enough for them to eat it, drink it, right? And we're not talking about a couple of dozen people. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of people. That's a lot of quail, a lot of manna, and a lot of water. But God was leading them through baby steps. And now we stand at the Jordan River, as we talked about last week, and he says, now I need you to get your feet wet before I show you the way forward. Folks, I want you to know this. God is not trying to hurt you, but you're going to have to get your feet wet. There's going to be problems, and he'll show you the way, and he'll lead you up through this stuff, and he'll provide. But at some point, he's not going to move before you do. And I'll call that a toddler step, all right? They had to get their feet wet before they could see the way forward, right? Israel was commanded to wash themselves, their clothes, to prepare for God to come down, to demonstrate his power again, like he did at the Red Sea crossing. But this time, you've got to exercise a little more faith than you did last time or up to this point, right? Well, guess what? When they get across Jordan, he's going to ask them to take a big boy step. You ever been told it's time to get our big boy pants on? Right? What do they say these days? Cowboy up and cowgirl up, right? What is that saying? That's saying let's step it up a little bit. It's time to grow up and do something big. Right? So look at Joshua chapter number 6. Joshua chapter number 6. What I'm showing you is a progression. Right? God started out by convincing Moses who I am, how I am, and what I want you to do. Moses said, okay, fine. He told the whole nation. He said, all right, let's go do that. Well, they did. There was trouble, there was turmoil, but baby steps. And God would show them in little bitty increments. This is what I'm saying, and I'm going to prove it to you. And this is what I'm saying, I'm going to prove it to you. And then he said, all right, now we're going to have to take a bigger step, and you're going to have to get your feet wet. Well, now I'm going to really test you. You've seen all the baby steps we've taken. You've seen that big step that we took, that mediocre step we took. Now it's time for a big step. Joshua chapter 6, verse 1. Now Jericho was straitly shut up because of the children of Israel. None went out, and none came in. And the Lord said unto Joshua, see, I have given into thine hand Jericho, and the king thereof, and the mighty men of valor. Ye shall compass the city, and all the men of war, and go around about the city once. Thus shalt thou do 6 days. Now think about that. Verse 4 says, and the 7 priests shall bear before thee the ark 7 trumpets of ram's horn, and the 7th day ye shall compass the city 7 times, and the priest shall blow with the trumpets. And it shall come to pass, verse 5, that when they make long blast with the ram's horn, and when ye hear the sound of the trumpet, all the people shall shout with a great shout, and the wall of the city shall fall down flat, and the people shall ascend up, every man straight before him. All right, so we've talked about this before. This is a progression of faith increments. Joshua, I want you to, we just crossed the Jordan River on dry ground. And now we've got the city in front of us, walled city, very, very thick walls. They're locked in there. You see how scared they are? I'm giving it to you. Well, yeah, but what are we going to do with this thing? We can't get in. They're not coming out. We're going to have to how, God, is this going to become ours? Well, here's the plan. I want you to go out and walk around the city once. Okay. And then tomorrow do it again. And for 7 days, you're just going to walk around it one time. Okay, I don't see how this is going to work, right? Would you understand how that would work? It doesn't sound like a very good plan, does it? You know, sometimes when I teach and preach on prayer, You're going to go into your office. You're going to get on your knees. You're going to get before God. You're going to lay out your burden. You're not going to hear anything audibly. But, man, you're just going to have to know that when you get up, God heard you, and go on like he did. That kind of sounds like this deal. You get up. Well, I know God heard me. Well, how do you know that? You're just going to have to plunge into the day like he did, right? And if the wall don't fall down the first day, you're going to have to get on your knees the second day, and the third day, and the fourth day, and the fifth day, and the sixth day. And listen, one day might come, you might have to spend the whole day there in prayer, knowing that God's hearing you and that it's going to work, because God said prayer worked and that he would hear you and answer, right? Whatsoever you may ask. I just want you to take a quick assessment. How much time in prayer have you spent? How confident and how is your faith? And you can assess that by how much time did you spend praying. I believe that's an accurate assessment. On the seventh day, he said, I'm going to have you walk around 7 times, and then I'm going to take sledgehammers and beat the walls. No. He said, blow on trumpets. Oh, yeah, I see how that's going to work, right? Well, it doesn't make any sense if you think about it humanly, right? But God says, I don't want you to think humanly. I just opened up the Jordan, and you walked on dry ground even though it was flooded. I just fed you for 40 years with a bread from heaven that showed up in the morning, was gone by afternoon, and if you kept any that you shouldn't have kept, it turned into worms. I just watered you from a rock. Is this making sense to you? Right? God says, I need you to grow in your faith. And now I'm going to test you. Now I want you to do something that really doesn't make any sense humanly. And so God says, trust me in an even greater way and obey me. And if you do, I'm going to reward you by doing something that even in the year 2024, people go, it didn't happen. That's crazy. Scientists are still explaining away the walls of Jericho. And archaeologists are still digging it up, saying, well, it just sure looks like they fell down flat. But we can't explain it. Of course you can't, because God did it. It was a faith step, a big boy step of faith for the nation of Israel. Now, some of you have been around a while, and you know I've shared this. From Jericho, they were told, don't take anything. It's all mine. I'm going to give you the city. You're going to destroy it. We're going to increase our faith. We're going to take a big boy step of faith, but nothing in there is yours. Well, somebody stole something. Achan decided, man, I like the looks of that garment, and here's some gold. I'm just going to stick it in my tent, and nobody will be the wiser except God, who knows everything, right? And when they went to Ai, the next city that didn't have walls, wasn't a big city, the men of Ai kicked their tail. Why? Because they didn't obey God. And then they were crying, God, what's the matter? We don't understand. Well, you didn't obey me. That's what the matter is. I did my part. Well, God told them who it was, and they took care of business, defeated Ai, headed off to take care of the rest of the land, inherit the land, and somebody comes along and says, oh, we're from a far country. See this moldy bread? And the nation of Israel didn't even ask God about it. What am I saying? I'm saying the nation of Israel is just like us. And because of that, we can look at them for an example of what we should be doing and what we shouldn't be doing. How we should be trusting God and sometimes how we don't. But God will lead you through baby steps, toddler steps, but He's going to, at some point, He's going to expect you to take some big boy steps, right? And they're challenging. I mentioned last week a couple of things that God challenged me on, still challenging me on several things in my life, and I have to say, all right, Lord, I still trust you. I'm still confident that you're going to take care of me, right? That's those steps up in our faith, and that's what I called this in my notes, the steps up in faith. Right? Last we stepped out in faith, got our feet wet. This week we're stepping up in faith. Right? Yeah, start off small but get bigger. Anybody have a question, a thought, a comment, a testimony, anything like that? Did anybody take a step of faith lately and see God answer your faith and increase your faith because of your obedience? I hear crickets. I think I hear crickets. Or scurry of mouse feet, maybe. No? No steps of faith lately? I heard somebody tapped a whole bunch of trees and then thought the weather was going to change and not give them any sap, but here it is flowing. I heard something about that. They even bragged on it on YouTube, that they tapped a bunch of trees and it was going to not flow, and then it flowed. What's that all about? What are you grinning for, Mark? Right? The man tapped how many hundreds of trees? 1,000 trees with maple taps, right? And a week later, he's putting on YouTube, the weather's not going to cooperate, we're not going to get any sap, it's the end. It's all over, it said. And then all of a sudden he looked at his buckets and they're all overflowing. Right? I'm sure that you're not the only one thankful. All those men that went down there and helped you run all them taps and run all them, I'm sure they're thankful as well that all wasn't for naught. But hey, I'm not picking on Mark. I just want you to see that God is working in your life. You may not have thought about it this way. You may not have identified the baby steps that He's been leading. Maybe it's not, God plaguing Pharaoh that's been happening in your life, but there's still those steps there. If you'll just say, all right, Lord, show me those steps of faith because I want to increase. Lord, increase our faith, as the disciples said. It's not going to happen by accident. You're going to have to want to grow your faith and want to trust the Lord and look for those opportunities and identify them. Because that's what's going to increase your faith, is when you identify, here was the challenge, this is what God did, and man, that was a blessing. Right? All right.